Are you ready to get started on your next epoxy project? From river tables to charcuterie boards to countertops to jewelry, understanding the drying time is vital. Let's take a look at this great product and we'll provide you some tips to create your next masterpiece. The drying time of epoxy will always depend on the brand of epoxy that you are using for the project. Upstart Epoxy Deep Pour has a flexible working time of 6 hours, a cure time of 72 hours, and the art resin features a fast 30-minute working time, and it cures in about 24 hours. In any case, we do recommend reading the instructions carefully to determine the correct time for your product. Some people like to sand down their resin or move their pieces to other locations, and if the epoxy is not fully cured, then these actions can damage your project, like distorting it or attracting dust particles to the surface, and nobody wants that. On average, you can expect to wait about 72 hours for the epoxy to be fully set if you're using deep pour. Can I dry the resin faster? Now that the question of how long does it take for epoxy to dry has been answered, you might want to know if you can speed up the process. But waiting for the epoxy resin to cure can be frustrating. However, we can do a few things to reduce that epoxy drying time. The most impactful thing you can do is keep your room at a high temperature when working with epoxy. This can lead to the epoxy curing faster. Think about adding a heat lamp to provide more warmth for your space, or turning up the temperature so the room sits at about 70 to 80 degrees. It is important when monitoring your epoxy after pouring with a heat gun or a torch to prevent any bubbles from appearing. But be careful not to apply these methods on the surface for too long, otherwise it may result in cracks or discolorations or variations of forms in the surface or burnt areas. And once again, nobody wants that. As you may already know, there are certain factors that affect the drying time of epoxy. Paying attention to the temperature and hardening agent to achieve the perfect results is imperative. Cold temperatures, while the epoxy will cure, it will slow down the process, and warm temperatures will speed them up. The other essential element in the drying process is the curing or hardening agent. If you start mixing different brands of epoxy, it can cloud up the look and your epoxy and ruin the curing process. Make sure to double check your measurements before mixing epoxy resin so that you can achieve your desired results. Keeping your work area debris free. In order to keep your piece and work area debris free, we recommend spraying water on the floor of your working area to trap any existing dust from rising up while you pour, and also using compressed air to blow out any existing dust in any container you may be using to cover your piece. We recommend using a see-through plastic container to monitor the curing process for projects to make sure no debris lands in your piece. These types of plastic containers can be those plastic lids from cakes, Tupperware, etc. This one you can be creative with. We hope you found these tips helpful, and make sure to tag us in your next creation. This has been Steve with Upstart Epoxy, and we'll see you next time.